I would like to begin by congratulating the Vedanta Centers of Australia, the Society for Philosophy and Culture, Victoria University for organizing this great seminar in honor of Swami Vivekananda's 150th birthday. And the topic also is very appropriate since it is with regard to the self that Swami Vivekananda's message, the emphasis of his message was on. My problem is that I'm the third speaker speaking on the same subject, and none of us knew what the other one is going to say. So while I was waiting and saying, oh, maybe I could say this, and they already said that, whatever. So I don't want to be repetitive, but it's also an advantage that most of the important ideas concerning this idea of self have already been covered very elegantly by the earlier two speakers. So a lot of what I might say is something that you would have already heard this afternoon. Swami Vivekananda once said that we Vedantists must learn to look at everything from the subjective standpoint. And he explains that instead of asking why something is the way it is, we can ask, why do I see it that way? So to understand non-dualism, to understand Vedanta, it's very important to cultivate this subjective attitude, subjective way of looking. Even the inquiry into religion or even inquiry into our experience really began by looking out at the world and asking, how did all this come about? Or what does all this mean? And so religious inquiry can begin by looking at the world outside and asking who made it or where did it come from? And one generic answer that comes, expressed in many different ways by many religions, is God. And of course, there are many different ways that the word God is understood. Apart from that there is some being or some reality from which this world came. That was the approach taken by many religious inquiries. At some point, those people who are asking these questions, some of them realized the futility of it. They felt that there's never going to be a way of finding a conclusive, definitive answer to the mystery of life by asking about the world outside. So it is then that the inquiry turned inward. And they began to ask, who is this person who is asking the question? If I have question regarding the world, who is this person who is having these questions regarding the world? And that's what I mean by focusing on the inside. Now, when we make an effort to focus inside, what do we see? Swami Vivekananda, in that the presentation he made at what's called the Parliament of Religions, really, which is, we could say, the first interfaith gathering in contemporary history. It happened in 1893 in Chicago, by which really Vivekananda was transformed from an unknown monk into a well-known figure in history. The question that Swami Vivekananda asked at that meeting was this: if you close your eyes and repeat I 4 times or 5 times, what is it that comes before our mind's eye? And almost always, the first thing that comes is my body, the way I am. That's how the subjective inquiry begins. In the course of a day, right from the time we wake up till the time we go to sleep, we use this personal pronoun I so many times. And then when we begin to ask, who is this I? What is this I? Who am I as a person? What are the dimensions of my personality? And one dimension is very obvious, very clearly, our body. So if someone were to ask us, who are you? There are any number of ways we can answer that question. Most of us probably would answer it best by telling our name. I'm this. But we could also answer that question in terms of our gender. Who are you? An answer like I'm a man, I'm a woman is a very valid answer. I could answer that question in terms of my religion, my race, my culture, my nationality. I could answer that question in terms of my political persuasion or my favorite sports team. It could be any number of ways I could answer that question. And all of those answers would be valid. We could answer that question in terms of our relationships. I could say in terms of I'm a son of so-and-so, or I'm a father of so-and-so. And so our I, which is really what self is. I mean, self seems like a big philosophical concept or an entity, but really is just who I am, the self. So who am I? And we will discover that each of us really has multiple ways of understanding ourselves. Simultaneously, we can be a son or daughter, a father, mother, husband, wife. Simultaneously, we are also human beings. We are men, women. Simultaneously, I could define myself in terms of my height, my weight, and so on. So then the question comes, if I can define myself in so many different ways, who am I really? Am I all of these things? Am I some of these things? Or what? And we might then say, well, although there are any number of ways I can answer the question who I am, some of these things kind of are with me all through life. Some things can change over time. For instance, when I'm a little child, I'm a child. But when I become a teenager, I'm not a child. So my identity as a child has vanished and another identity has taken its place. I'm a teenager or I'm a youth. So there are certain identities that we have which change over time, which change with age. Certain identities might change with place. I could now, if I'm a resident, if I'm born and raised in New Zealand, do you say New Zealander? Is that a term? And then if you say you move, you immigrate to say the United States, then you're no longer a New Zealander. You become an American. So that identity can change with change in place and so on. Then the question that can come, doesn't come in the minds of all, but it can come in the minds of some people, is among these changing multiple identities I seem to carry simultaneously, is there any one identity, or I'm just a jumble, a box filled with many identities? Which of my identities I use more often than others? Sometimes people are in the habit of carrying not just one credit card, several credit cards. And you might find that even though you might have more than one credit cards, you tend to use one credit card more than the others, perhaps because you have some greater benefits, maybe more mileage and things like that. Exactly in the same way, while we have these simultaneous multiple identities which we carry, there are certain identities which we might use more than others. For instance, if someone is very active politically, then I'm not much familiar with the New Zealand politics, so let me just give you an American example where I'm more familiar with. So if someone is very active politically there, then their identity would be much stuck with whether I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. And that identity would come up more and more often in the course of a day because I'm very active in that. So similarly, whichever field or whichever aspect of life I'm more involved in, then my identity associated with that field or that aspect would be more dominant. Now, who would we say is a spiritual person? A spiritual person would be one whose identity, the dominant identity, is one that is closest to the spirit. Now that the word spirit has come, let me say something about a little bit more about that. Going back to the question I asked before, that who am I? And the first thing that comes to mind is the body. But we know that we are not just the body. There are lots of things within my personality which no surgeon will find if my body is cut open. Things like, obviously, the mind, the intellect, the ego, my thoughts, emotions, feelings, they are very much a part of me, but we don't really say they're not physical in the sense that we really can't find where they are. But still, I know they are very much a part of me. So those invisible aspects of my personality, which would include the mind, the intellect, the ego, and all of that, or we could generically, if you want, we could call it by the word simply the mind, but recognizing that it means all of this. The word that gets often used in Vedantic tradition, they call it the inner instrument. It's called antah karana. Antah means inner, karana is instrument. So if my body, the physical body, is the external instrument, then this invisible part of my mind is an internal, inner instrument. So then we have this part of our personality which is visible to us, visible to everybody. And there is another part of our personality which is just visible to me. So what's going on in my mind right now, only I know. None of you know it. And yet it's still something that is me. The question that can come is that, is there anything more in me besides the portion which is visible and the portion which is invisible? It is there that Vedantic thinkers and philosophers have said that yes, there is something more in me than simply the parts which are visible and invisible. Is there a water somewhere? Yeah. And that invisible part, the part which is beyond the visible and the invisible, is what they say is the spirit, as opposed to these two, which are matter. Now that the body is material, we all understand. We all know that whether we like it or not, sooner or later, but better later than sooner, it's going to turn into a heap of dust or a heap of ashes. So that it's material, and students of chemistry can even find out what the chemical composition of the human body is. So the materiality of the human body is not a matter in dispute. But what about the mind? And what these thinkers pointed out was that the mind is also material. If we come to think of it, there is not really much difference between the body and mind. Pretty much everything that happens to the body happens to the mind as well. We know that both can get tired, or we know that if you give healthy food to your body, you become healthy. If you give healthy food to your mind, healthy, positive ideas, your mind becomes healthy. You put junk in your body, you fall ill. Put junk in your mind falls ill. Both have their doctors. Pretty much whatever happens to the body happens to the mind, except that you can see the body, you cannot see the mind. But just because you don't see something doesn't make it any less material. For instance, no one has seen an isolated electron or any of these subatomic particles. But there is nothing terribly spiritual about an electron. It's just that it's just too subtle. Now the mind, according to these thinkers, is even more subtle than the tiniest physical particle that modern science has been able to isolate. So, because the body and the visible and the invisible parts of our personality are both material, they are able to act and react upon one another. And we know that. We know how body influences the mind and the mind influences the body. In fact, even modern medicine now accepts that the majority of the illnesses that we suffer from are psychosomatic in nature because of the interaction between the body and mind. Now, this third entity, which is the spirit, is non-material. And because it is non-material, it does not have to follow the laws of matter. In other words, it doesn't come into being at some point, doesn't disintegrate. All these, I don't want to go into technicalities. The Vedanta texts speak about the 6 kinds of transformations that occur in material entities, but we don't have to go into that. Just enough to know that there is a part of my personality which is beyond all the material laws. The next question would be, to put it in rather simplistic terms, there are these 3 parts in who I am. There is the visible part, there is the invisible part, and then there is this third something, the spirit. Am I all of these? Am I one of these? Who am I? And what these Vedantic thinkers pointed out was that I'm really the spirit. I'm really this non-material part. The material part, the body and mind, are only coverings. In that great book, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that just as we wear these clothes, and clothes are a covering, and then when clothes get soiled or are torn, we change them. Yet when we change our clothes, we don't feel that I'm a new person, because the person is same, only the covering is changed. Exactly in the same way, the body and mind are coverings over who I really am. So although poets have said, naked I came out of my mother's womb and naked I go, when we are born, we are not really naked. We already come with a body dress and a mind dress. That's the Vedantic position. Now, if I know I'm the spirit, then all of the problems that we experience in life just vanish, because the spirit is birthless and deathless. If we just look at our lives and ask, what is it that is the cause of stress and anxiety in my life? And we will discover, first, there is change. There are people who are able to deal with change. There are people who can't. And especially if the time and intensity and nature of that change is uncertain. Well, earthquake is just one of the ways in which that change can occur. It can be sudden, it can be cataclysmic, it can be most unexpected. But there are many things that can occur in life, and change is certainly one major factor in life which produces anxiety and stress in our lives. And finally, not just the change, the ultimate point to which that change could be just destruction. The reality of death, the reality of recognizing that we are mortal beings. What Vedanta asks is, are we really mortal beings? What is it within us that makes us feel that we are mortal? We could say that these coverings over our personality, the body and mind, these are mortal. These are prone to change. These will be destroyed. But me, the real me, will not be destroyed. Swami Vivekananda said that the particles of matter which come together and are held together, which is what makes this body be as it is, when the force that brought these particles together is removed, then these particles are going to go apart. So he put it very beautifully. He said that every composition presupposes a certain future decomposition. And that decomposition really the composition of the material particles which hold the body together, that's really what we call death. So the question that we can ask is, where is my I located? In Sanskrit and in many Indian languages, normally when we greet each other, how are you? How do you do? In many Indian languages, the word that is used for that is, are you swastha? Swastha, swa is self, stha means established in. So when people ask one another in Indian languages, are you well? How are you doing? Really they say, are you swastha? Literally translated, that would mean, it sounds odd when you translate literally, it really means, are you established in yourself? The word swastha in Sanskrit and many Indian languages again means healthy. As opposed to, if you put the prefix a before it, then it becomes aswastha, which means unhealthy, which means illness. So, that term understood philosophically would mean that when I am established in my true self, I'm really healthy. When I'm not established in my true self, I'm not healthy. Just one example. Let's say that there's an event like this, and you have parked your car in some garage nearby, or some parking lot somewhere. Maybe it's such a huge gathering that several people have parked their cars in several different garages or several different parking lots. And then now suddenly a news comes. This is just a kind of just an example. The news comes that there has been a certain fire in one of the garages and many of the cars are destroyed. Now, if your car is parked in some garage, you are going to be worried that, there's a problem. And then, of course, when you discover that the fire has not been in that garage where you parked your car, but in some other garage, then you first is a relief. And then you said, okay, so I'm okay, I'm safe. What it means is that it's not simply the garage which is on fire is a problem. The problem is really where you have parked your car. If you have parked your car in a place which is facing danger, then you are affected. If you have parked your car in a place which is safe, then you're not affected. Using this analogy, we now have to ask ourselves, where have I parked my car? Where have I parked my idea of the self? Where have I parked it? Really, that's basically it. In other words, when my I is parked in my body, and let's say think about the body as a parking garage. If my I is parked in my body, then whatever happens to my body, I'm going to be affected by it. Just like if my car is parked in a particular garage, whatever happens to that garage, my car will be affected. Exactly the same way, if I'm parked in my body, then whatever happens to the body, I'll be affected. And we see that. For instance, now, if I have a severe headache, I actually have a slight headache now, that's why this example comes to the mind. Then, if my eye is parked in the body, I'm going to be affected by that headache. But when I fall asleep, if I fall, sometimes when you have a headache, you might find it difficult to fall asleep. But if you're really exhausted, your exhaustion kind of overpowers that headache and you do fall asleep. Something very interesting happens. As soon as you fall asleep, you don't feel your headache anymore. Whatever is causing that headache, it's still there, but you don't feel it, because when you're asleep, you are not parked in your body anymore. When you're asleep, you are oftentimes just parked in your mind. And that's why then we see dreams. Dreams are your mind is very active. It just projects all these things, and then whatever the mind does, you are affected by it because you are parked in your mind. Then Of course, every night there is also this small part of night where we are not even dreaming. Sometimes it's called just deep sleep. In Sanskrit, they call it sushupti, a state in which we are not even dreaming. Now, in that state, we are not parked either in our body nor in our mind. And when we are not parked in our body or the mind, in that state of deep sleep, we do not experience any of the stress or anxiety that we have when we are awake. We don't have any pains and aches that we experience when we are awake. Because in deep sleep, we don't have the sense of I. Myself is not located either in my body or my mind when I am fast asleep. And that's why when a person who wakes up after this deep sleep, the person says, I had great sleep. I slept well. I didn't know anything. Our experiences in the waking life would be very different. Clearly, we are all unique individuals with each has a very unique life story. And so our experiences in the waking world will be very different. They don't have to be identical. They are not identical. Our dreams might be very different. But our experience in that deep sleep, whether you are from east or west or north or south, irrespective of any of these differentiations that we encounter in our daily life, in that state of deep sleep, every living being, not just human beings, every living being experiences a complete state of peace, fulfillment, and perfection, almost. Which is great. Now, we might think that, well, if I can be free from stress and anxiety by going into deep sleep, why not just remain in deep sleep? Unfortunately, we can't. Think about it this way. Even if you have nothing to do next morning, even if you don't put any alarm, even if you ask that nobody should wake you up, you will still wake up sometime or other. You can't sleep indefinitely. And of course, when you wake up, as if all your anxieties and worries were just waiting by your bedside, you're just back with all those aches and pains. What these Vedantic thinkers asked was that state of complete peace and fulfillment that I seem to enjoy in that state of deep sleep. Is it possible for me to reclaim that, not just in deep sleep, but in other states as well? Because you see, we really don't have to do a lot of meditation and yoga and all these things to just get good sleep. That just oftentimes comes. Of course, if you do all these things, you might get sleep a little quicker. But whether or not people do any of these disciplines or practices, everyone sleeps. So it's something that happens in a natural course. The question is, will it be possible for me to experience that deep peace and contentment in sleep consciously, with effort, even when I'm awake, even when I'm in the midst of the din and bustle of life? And yes, we can do that. We can do that only when we are able to park our car in the right place. Only when we are able to remain established in the deepest core of our being. So the concepts about the self, concepts of self would help us understand the various ways in which the self is understood. But we must also keep in mind that the concept of the self is different from the self. It's like the picture of a mango is different from a mango. You cannot eat the picture. You need a real mango. So even when we are discussing concepts of self, the concepts are only a scaffolding, something for us, helpful for us to think. But self itself is not just a concept. Self is a very real entity. And that entity is who you and I really are.